Thank you so much for inviting me to this platform today. I had often wondered, actually, for the last decade or so, that why was there no initiative, at least from the Indian side, to have a collaboration or a collaborative effort to bring together Kashmiri Pandits and Armenians to talk about the respective genocides that they have been subjected to. Therefore, I really congratulate Red Lantern Analytica today that you made the effort to bring us together to speak about the persecution we have faced almost continents apart. And because I really feel that, as Eily Wiesel, who's documented and written a lot of books on the Jewish Holocaust and genocide. He once said that for the dead and the living, we must bear witness. And I think that's what we are doing today, that we are bearing witness of the genocide, both the communities, both the native communities of Kashmir and Armenia have faced at the hands of Islamists. And I think it is very important to point out one thing here before I get into my larger story on the Kashmiri Pandit genocide. That genocide is something very specific. It is not simply, war killings. It's not simply two states coming to war and highlighting each other, killing each other's people. It's not that. It's something very specific. Genocide is essentially systematic annihilation of people, uh, over their identity. So identity is the key word here. When I say Armenians have been subjected to genocide or Kashmiri Hindus have been subjected to genocide, and for example, Dr. Mirza spoke very beautifully and poignantly about the genocide of Hindus in Pakistan, we are essentially talking about persecution uh, and massacre and ethnic cleansing of communities, of indigenous communities, across the world, whether it's Jews or Armenians or Kashmiri Pandits or Bengalis who were subjected to genocide in 1971 in East Pakistan. They were subjected to genocide because the issue is not about really, two states coming to a war. The issue is the identity. The issue is who these people really, what kind of value system they represent. And this idea of Islamism, of Islamic jihad, that they need to either wipe out or annihilate indigenous tribes to conquer the territory and also conquer the people, is something that is rooted in history, and it's something that we have seen happening and prevailing even after the world came together to form United Nations and came together to agree on the idea of the nation state and came together on ratifying that um, democratic republics are, they have the authority and the sovereignty over their own territories and over their own people. And yet, it seems that Islamism, the almost, I would say, a fascistic idea, because it takes Islam into a different trajectory. It removes Islam from the spiritual space, or the space of faith, and turns it into a political system. So when I say Islamism, I mean the political Islam, which believes in having an Islamic state, which believes in having conquering people, conquering territories, even even if it takes annihilation of indigenous tribes. Now, I want to talk about Kashmiri Pandit genocide today because I am a displaced Kashmiri Pandit. But the tragedy is that even though we live in India, a secular democratic republic, the government of India till date has not recognized that Kashmiri Pandits went through genocide in Kashmir. In fact, at the most, our governments have said is that there was a disturbance in Kashmir in 1990, and Kashmiri Pandits became migrants. So it's as if, Kashmiri Pandits volunteered to become migrants for some kind of a vacation outside their own homeland. And that is the trouble here. That is the issue really at heart. If you really look at Armenia, if you look at Jews who were subjected to genocide, there was a collective effort on part of the communities and on part of their own states to recognize genocide of their communities, to recognize that their indigenous people were persecuted and subjected to ethnic cleansing. But here in India, unfortunately, 400,000 Kashmiri Pandits were evicted from Kashmir, from their homeland, from the place of their ancestors, from the place of their indigenous roots. And yet the government of India did not recognize it as genocide, because the argument that we heard from some of the intellectuals, pseudo intellectuals in India, was that only the government figure for Kashmiri Pandits who were killed by Islamists in 1990 when Pakistan sponsored Islamic Jihad erupted in Kashmir. The official figure for the killings of Kashmiri Pandits was around 209 or something. The tragedy here is that the government of India has not even bothered itself to do a proper survey of how many Kashmiri Hindus were actually killed by Pakistani Islamist jihadis in 1990. And it actually came to the shoulders of the community itself, which did a survey in the last 20-30 years, and they came, I think in one of the reports, it was found that around 1,000 Kashmiri Pandits were killed by the Pakistani-backed Islamists in Kashmir. And for a minuscule community in Kashmir, now for our Armenian audience who probably are participating here, I just want to give a very short, brief history of the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits in Kashmir. In 1990, Pakistan-backed Islamists killed, massacred Kashmiri Pandits, and that caused the eviction of 400,000 Kashmiri Pandits from the valley. But that was not the first exodus or first attempt at genocide of Kashmiri Pandits in Kashmir. Kashmiri Pandits are the aborigines of Kashmir. We have a recorded history of 5,000 years. And in 1990, it was the seventh exodus. The first began in 14th century under Sultan Sikandar in Kashmir, after the advent of Islam and Islamic rule in Kashmir. So from 14th century till 1990, we have had 7 exoduses, and no political party, no government in India has bothered to do any research, to do any kind of legislation, to bring any kind of legislation on preservation of Kashmiri Hindus in Kashmir. Even as the Constitution of India has, and rightly so, has had laws for the preservation of tribals and tribal communities in other parts of the country, but Kashmiri Hindus, since it is, I would say, an educated community and an emancipated community, no one really bothered about their preservation of their ethnic and indigenous roots and culture and identity. In the last 30 years, the community has lost not only their home, but also lost their identity, lost their culture in many ways. The community has almost uh, is almost on the verge of extinction because a lot of women married outside their community. Lot of Kashmiri Pandits adapted the local cultures and local identities of wherever they went and tried to assimilate and settle down across India and outside India as well. Therefore, I think I'm going to end it here because there might be other questions and there are several speakers here. I'm going to say only one thing, that it is the obligation and the duty, the moral responsibility of the government of India and also the United Nations to recognize the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits. And also, the government of India should bring in a legislation, uh, a genocide bill essentially, to preserve Kashmiri Pandits and to prevent their further ethnic cleansing. If ever we return to Kashmir, we are rehabilitated in Kashmir, to prevent further genocides, to prevent further ethnic cleansing. The government must bring in a legislation to preserve their culture, their identity, just as it has done in the case of tribals and other indigenous communities in the rest of India. Thank you.